No one expected it, not even those closest to him. In a hushed, unplanned moment at a private engagement, King Charles uttered a truth so loaded, so divisive, it would ripple through the corridors of royal history like a silent detonation. The late King George VI, it turns out, had secretly set aside a prized heirloom for only one descendant, Prince William. And the revelation didn't just wound, it ignited. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began as a quiet dinner, low profile, intimate, the kind of gathering where appearances are everything and truths are nothing more than subtle nods. But this time, protocol fractured. Charles, seemingly unprovoked, leaned into a moment of personal reflection and dropped a truth that stunned even the most composed members of the royal circle. He revealed that the cufflinks, those storied symbols of King George VI, worn during wartime speeches and moments of national crisis, had never been his to claim. They had, according to Charles, always been intended for William, chosen in silence and locked away for decades. The room froze. Camilla's gaze reportedly narrowed in disbelief, and Princess Anne, known for her unshakable exterior, looked away in sharp discomfort. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was catastrophic, because in that one admission, Charles didn't just reference an heirloom, he exposed a fracture in the lineage that had festered unseen. These cufflinks, after all, weren't ordinary accessories. They were power, they were legacy. They were the last whisper of a king who ruled in shadow and sacrifice, and who now we know had made a personal judgment call that bypassed the very son who was destined to inherit his throne. To many, this moment wasn't merely a sharing of royal trivia, it was a betrayal decades in the making. A calculated omission finally vocalized. So why now? Why, after so many years under the scrutiny of crown and country, did Charles choose this moment to unearth a relic of favoritism? Those close to the family suspect it wasn't accidental. The timing was uncanny. Prince Harry, notably, was not present. His absence cast a ghostly silence over the event, as if the storm of estrangement had cleared space for old truths to be finally spoken. But make no mistake, this wasn't about jewelry. This was about inheritance, validation, and the subtle ways in which the monarchy communicates preference without uttering a single public word. The cufflinks weren't given, they were reserved, quietly, deliberately, with meaning that goes beyond gold or gemstones. And with that one explosive confession, Charles reopened a vault of emotion, rivalry, and long-dormant royal secrets that had been gathering dust but not peace. But what lay behind this stunning declaration wasn't just a choice of inheritance. It was a buried history of favoritism, betrayal, and coded messages left by a king long gone. They were locked away untouched for decades, hidden within the sealed compartment of a royal armoire. King George VI's cufflinks weren't just historical jewelry, they were an unspoken promise. One meant for a future king, but not the one everyone expected. The cufflinks had become ghosts long before they became symbols. Crafted in wartime and worn in moments of national reckoning, they had once brushed against the skin of a monarch who bore the weight of a nation in his voice. And yet, when King George VI passed, those same cufflinks vanished from sight, neither seen on the wrist of Queen Elizabeth II nor later embraced by her son Charles. It wasn't absence, it was intention. Royal insiders, over the years, whispered among themselves about the untouchable heirlooms. Objects too sacred, too charged, too deliberate to ever pass hands without a reason. These cufflinks were chief among them. They remained locked away, not out of forgetfulness, but out of purpose. And the purpose was never clearer than in the quiet rumors that began to circle like smoke behind palace doors. Senior staff who had served both George VI and his daughter noted the quiet reverence, almost fear, with which the box was handled. A senior valet once remarked that the cufflinks were not for this reign. That chilling statement, once dismissed as idle gossip, now rings like a prophecy. Even Queen Elizabeth, meticulous in honoring her father's legacy, had reportedly refused to wear them, citing a desire not to unsettle their spirit. But the silence was more than symbolic. It was strategic. Decades later, during the cataloguing of old Windsor archives, fragments of forgotten letters surfaced, Some were penned by King George himself, short, handwritten lines of reflection, hinting at a spiritual longing that his line continue through someone other than his direct heir. One particular line caught attention: "Perhaps it is not the son, but the son's son, who will carry my quiet strength." That cryptic note, folded between reports and photographs, suddenly took on catastrophic clarity in light of Charles's confession. The cufflinks weren't just a token, they were a message, skipped like a stone over one generation, aimed directly at another. And if Charles had always sensed this inheritance was never his to claim, it explained much his complicated relationship with his grandfather's memory, his unease with certain traditions, and his choice to keep the box sealed for all these years. The cufflinks became a metaphor, one that turned heirlooms into weapons, family into factions. Within the family, the growing tension around symbols of legacy reached a breaking point. Who inherited what was no longer about value, it was about validation. And to be passed over, especially in silence, was to be erased without the courtesy of confrontation. Yet it was the Queen Mother who had perhaps offered the most cryptic insight years before. In a rarely recorded conversation, she had been overheard saying, "Destiny chooses the gentler soul, the one who listens before they lead." At the time, her words were attributed to a general reflection on leadership. But now, reinterpreted in hindsight, they seem like a coded nod to a future monarch yet to take the throne, someone whose quiet resolve mirrored George VI's own style. Someone who wasn't Charles. And while the cufflinks were concealed in shadow, the truth behind their intended recipient was waiting to erupt like a storm cloaked in velvet. For years, Charles wore the crown but not the blessing. Behind palace walls, the pressure, the rejection, and the shadow of a grandfather's silent judgment gnawed at him. The confession wasn't just about cufflinks, it was about a man who always felt second best. The truth no one dared speak aloud was one Charles had carried like a private curse. Even as he stood atop the world, crowned in gold and bound by duty, there lingered a gnawing emptiness, one shaped not by lack of power, but by absence of approval. Charles may have been next in line, but never, not once, did he feel like the chosen one. And with the quiet emergence of King George VI's private intentions, the weight of that lifelong suspicion came crashing down. In the privacy of his journals, some leaked, others long hidden Charles penned thoughts riddled with self-doubt. Phrases like, "I wonder if I was ever enough," and "perhaps the crown fits the brow," but not the spirit, hinted at a man suffocating beneath ceremonial robes he never believed were stitched for him. His fear wasn't that he would fail as king, it was that he was never meant to succeed in the first place. His relationship with his grandfather was always tinged with distance. George VI was a wartime monarch forged in fire, while Charles, as a child, was raised in a post-war palace under the stern gaze of protocol and the quiet absence of paternal softness. The grandfather he vaguely remembered was a man of gravitas, silence, and selective warmth. And over the years, Charles's perception of him was sculpted more by myth than memory, until the myth shattered. The revelation about the cufflinks wasn't simply symbolic. To Charles, it confirmed what he had long feared, that he was not the living legacy of George VI, but rather a placeholder between past greatness and future promise. Camilla, often portrayed as the steely-eyed consort, had reportedly become the only person to whom Charles would confide these raw truths. Sources close to the family say it was Camilla who encouraged him to unburden himself, to share what he had carried too long in silence. This confession, uttered so abruptly in Windsor, may not have been calculated, but it was certainly cathartic. In speaking it, Charles gave voice to the invisible burden of living under the weight of expectations, whispers of comparison, and the legacy of a man whose affections were never his to claim. And perhaps, for the first time in his reign, Charles acted not as sovereign, but as son, grandson, and man, fractured and finally free enough to show it. Because within the royal family, what you inherit is never just title or crown. It's the emotional architecture of those who came before. And when a grandfather silently chooses a different successor, even in objects left untouched, the message lingers like smoke. Charles's entire reign, it now seems, was built atop a foundation he always questioned, not in legitimacy, but in love. And this moment, this confession, This bray, aching open of generational secrets, may have been the only way for him to finally reclaim a part of himself buried beneath decades of ceremonial stillness. But if Charles felt the weight of rejection, one man was unknowingly crowned in spirit long before coronation day ever arrived. He never asked for it, he never knew. Yet, all along, William was the silent recipient of a grandfather's love. A love passed down not in words, but in gold, silver, and whispered prophecy. But blessings in the royal family come wrapped in thorns. When the confession finally reached him, William was not prepared. How could he be? For a man raised on protocol, privacy, and relentless performance, the idea that a monarch long buried had shaped his path in secret was a revelation that unsettled more than it uplifted. Those closest to him described his reaction not as triumph, but as disbelief, quiet, stunned disbelief. In a family that guards its secrets with smiles and silence, William had grown accustomed to earning respect the hard way, to learn that he had, perhaps unknowingly, always been the one. The chosen soul in King George VI's vision left him grasping for clarity amid a legacy he never agreed to carry. Not because he rejected duty, but because no one had ever told him the cost of being quietly anointed. Inside the palace, the implications sent shivers through the halls of strategy. Kate, ever measured, reportedly urged calm, though even she was said to have been shaken by the sheer symbolic weight this placed on her husband. Behind closed doors, advisors scrambled. The optics were treacherous. To acknowledge the Cufflinks as an intentional inheritance from George VI was to elevate William publicly above, not just his father, but his brother, and the monarchy could ill afford another fracture. But emotion doesn't wait for spin, and for William, the emotional burden settled in quietly. It wasn't a prize, it was a prophecy. And in that prophecy, he saw his own childhood differently. He began to revisit memories that once seemed ordinary, stories of restraint, encouragements to listen before leading, subtle shifts in his grooming that always set him apart. Was it coincidence? Or had his education, his refinement, been nudged along an invisible path forged by a man he never knew? It was no longer lost on him that, over the years, royal aides had often described him as reflective, measured, dignified under pressure. Words that had once sounded flattering now felt ominous echoes of the very traits King George VI was known for during his reluctant reign. And suddenly, the burden didn't feel noble. It felt scripted. Even in the way he interacted with the public, the press, and the pain of his family's fractured image, William had unknowingly mirrored a grandfather whose legacy was carved not through charisma, but through quiet endurance. And while many praised him for it, the revelation that he had been designed for it from birth haunted him, because when choice is stripped from duty, what remains is a cage, one lined with gold but no less suffocating. And yet, the weight had to be borne. As the story of the Cufflinks spiraled, William had to decide whether to accept the role fate had silently penned for him or resist it. The crown may have been visible, but this second inheritance, the one forged in secrecy and sentiment, was far more dangerous. It reshaped how he saw his family, it redefined his past, and it quietly condemned his future to one of inherited expectation. And while William wrestled with the crown of invisible expectation, another prince across the ocean would see this as final proof of his deepest fear. Across the Atlantic, a red-haired prince reportedly smashed a glass in disbelief. This wasn't just about cufflinks, it was confirmation. For Prince Harry, the confession unraveled every hope that the institution ever truly saw him. And what followed was heartbreak. The moment the news reached Montecito, the air in the Sussex household reportedly turned cold with realization. Charles's admission didn't just shock the royal family, it broke something in Harry that had long been fraying. For years, he'd wrestled with feeling like an accessory to a dynasty built around hierarchy and image. Always the spare, never the heir. But this, the knowledge that their own grandfather had chosen William, quietly and deliberately, decades before Harry was even aware of his role in the monarchy, struck like a betrayal scripted long before his exit. Sources close to the couple revealed that Harry reacted with a mix of rage and grief. The glass that shattered wasn't just a symbol of anger, it was the sound of a final thread snapping. Meghan, known for her fiercely protective stance toward her family, was reportedly livid. To her, the revelation wasn't just about inheritance, it was about rejection that transcended time. How could an ancestor choose one grandson while condemning the other to invisibility? The pain wasn't limited to the past. It was present, immediate, and scorching. The timing of the confession felt personal. With tensions already high, the message, however unintentional, was received loud and clear in California. Harry was never meant to belong. Not to the crown, not to the legacy, not to the history, and certainly not to the future King George VI had envisioned. This wasn't new pain, it was old pain revived. The same ache that had haunted Harry since childhood, the sense of being secondary, peripheral, tolerated but not treasured. The media had dubbed him the Wild One, but behind the smiles and scandals was a boy desperate for identity beyond the title. The Cufflinks, once hidden away in the quiet corners of Windsor, now screamed volumes in silence. And for Harry, this revelation reopened every scar he had fought to heal, from his mother's death to his exile from royal life. The crown had always been cold, but this was glacial. The fallout within the Sussex household was immediate. Conversations turned into confrontations. Reflections turned into re-evaluations. Harry's recent public remarks, once vague, took on chilling new context. In a past interview, he had hinted that some legacies are meant to be rewritten. Now those words read like defiance carved from betrayal. Every speech, every memoir, every podcast took on a sharper edge in light of what he now knew. The monarchy hadn't just overlooked him, it had structurally removed him from its deeper emotional lineage. And worse still, no one had ever told him. This revelation may have been the final undoing of whatever fragile hope remained that reconciliation was possible. Not because of spite, but because of clarity. For Harry, this wasn't just about cufflinks, it was about truth. The truth that he was never part of the plan. That while he had fought for recognition, the decision had already been made, sealed in metal and stored in silence. No amount of charity, military service, or devotion could override the ancestral script he was never written into, not even by his own blood. But even as the brothers reeled from emotional opposites, the real question now echoed in every corridor of the palace. Why did King George make such a choice? And what had he foreseen? Locked in a dust-laden vault beneath Windsor, a set of personal diaries belonging to King George VI may hold the answer to everything. Scrawled in fading ink, one entry seems to predict the future and hints at why only one boy was destined to wear the cufflinks. The discovery was accidental. During a long overdue restoration of Windsor's deepest archives, C. Hamber, a sealed drawer was found behind a decaying panel of oak. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth and tied with a fraying ribbon, were 5 leather-bound volumes diaries belonging to King George VI, dated between 1945 and 1951. What began as wartime reflections quickly spiraled into something far more ominous. These were not just journals, they were riddles, laced with anxieties, veiled judgments, and most disturbingly prophecies. One entry in particular, dated December 1949, sent a chill through every historian granted access. The king, now visibly ill and aware of his fading time, wrote, "The line may fracture, a second-born may rise in fire, but only the silent sun will restore the name." That sentence, buried in a sea of musings, suddenly loomed large, echoing eerily with today's royal reality. There was no direct naming of future grandchildren. And yet every line pointed to a blueprint of comparison traits, temperaments, and future trials, as though George VI had studied the soul of a dynasty that hadn't yet arrived. In another entry, he lamented the rise of pride within royal bloodlines, cautioning against heirs ruled by emotion and spectacle. Instead, he praised the gentle soul, who will lead with silence before speech and presence before power. To many, this now reads like a deliberate reference to William, whose calm demeanor and quiet strength have long drawn admiration, qualities that mirror the very restraint George VI once embodied in the darkest hours of war. But if William was the unspoken archetype, what of Harry? Buried deeper in the pages was a warning, dark and unmistakable. Beware the fire of the second-born, for he shall wrestle not with enemies but with himself. To skeptics, it sounded like coincidence, but to others, especially those haunted by the recent royal unraveling, it was a devastating insight. George VI may not have known names or faces, but he had sensed something elemental in his bloodline, something that whispered of division to come. He foresaw a future shaped by emotional fracture, and in preparing for it, he chose to anoint the peacemaker. Not the loudest, not the eldest, but the one most like himself. Historians are now divided. Was this prophecy or projection? Did a dying king pour his own regrets and fears into a vision that would later be reinterpreted to justify legacy? Or did he, in his final solitude, tap into something deeper, ancestral instinct perhaps, or the rare intuition born only in those who have carried unbearable weight? The debate rages, but what cannot be denied is that these entries, once hidden from the world, have shattered the notion that royal succession is merely constitutional. It's emotional, spiritual, and in this case, disturbingly prescient. The writings raise an even darker implication. If Charles had read these years ago, as some speculate, did he withhold them to protect his sons from a destiny already decided? Or worse, did he realize too late that he was only ever meant to be a bridge, one that led from one kind of monarch to another? Williams. And as these questions swirl in court and commentary alike, the power of one man's ink continues to draw new lines in the fabric of royal identity. And while the words of a long-dead king echoed like ghostly advice, others in the family viewed the revelation not as destiny but manipulation. They stood on the sidelines, smiling for cameras. But behind palace curtains, Princess Anne and Prince Edward saw the Cufflinks saga as the latest installment in a long royal pattern. Favor the visible, ignore the faithful. And this time, they would stay silent. For decades, they had carried the quieter burdens of royalty. Anne, the unwavering workhorse of the monarchy, often described as the hardest working royal, had served with relentless precision. Edward, the dutiful youngest, had never chased headlines, only responsibility. Yet they had both watched as history was shaped not by effort, but by attention. When the Cufflink confession emerged, when it became clear that King George VI had chosen William as a spiritual successor, while bypassing the rest, Anne reportedly responded with a single cutting phrase, "We wore the crown's burden, but not its jewelry." That one line sliced through years of silent frustration. It wasn't about the Cufflinks themselves, it was about what they represented, a legacy that prioritized image over integrity, spotlight over service. Edward, more reserved but no less affected, reportedly felt a growing sense of disillusionment. All his life, he had played the role of the dependable son, the one who never strayed, never scandalized, never complained. And yet, as Charles publicly revealed a private truth, one that reshaped their grandfather's legacy and rippled through the very foundation of the family, Edward questioned whether his loyalty had ever truly mattered. The favoritism, once unspoken, was now undeniable. George VI had made his choice, and it wasn't just about skipping a generation, it was about casting aside the others entirely. Both siblings began recalling moments from their youth when it became clear that royalty was never truly equal within its own walls. Anne remembered being expected to work harder, stay quieter, endure more. Edward remembered the praise that always hovered around William, even as a child, descriptions like steady, wise beyond his years, cut from a different cloth. None of it made sense then. Now, it made all too much. The revelation didn't just set the present, it rewrote the past. And it left those outside the golden spotlight, grappling with the painful reality that service, for all its sacrifice, might never be enough. The timing of Charles's confession added fuel to the fire. Anne reportedly questioned his judgment in revealing such a volatile truth, at a moment when the monarchy was already walking a tightrope of public scrutiny. She feared the emotional and symbolic fallout would fracture not just the family, but the institution itself. Edward agreed. The monarchy, already struggling to modernize while maintaining tradition, had been handed a live wire, and Charles had chosen to touch it with bare hands. Their voices, rarely heard in such moments of crisis, now carried the weary tone of those who had given everything and received little. There was no bitterness in the way they walked their royal path, only exhaustion. The cufflinks, to them, were not about inheritance. They were about the invisible scoreboard that had quietly dictated who mattered most within the family. And in this revelation it became painfully clear that merit had never been the metric, but as the living debated lineage, the past was not done yet, because buried in a royal crypt was one final twist that could destroy everything. Unearthed from the belongings of a former palace butler was a sealed letter, dated 1951. Inside, the late king made a confession so explosive it could tear apart the royal narrative. The cufflinks were meant for William, but not out of love, out of guilt. For decades, the letter sat unnoticed, tucked away in a box marked personal effects, buried beneath layers of old uniforms and faded correspondence. It wasn't discovered by a royal, but by the butler's great-nephew during a house clearance. The envelope, brittle and yellowed, bore the royal insignia and a single line in George VI's unmistakable hand: to be opened when truth must prevail. What lay inside would not only shake the foundations of Windsor Castle, but reveal the king's most hidden regret. The contents were simple but staggering. In a few tightly penned paragraphs, George VI admitted he believed he had emotionally failed his son. Charles, he wrote, had been raised under the shadow of silence, never given the affection he had craved, nor the validation he had deserved. I raised a future king, the letter read, but not the son I ought to have cherished. It was a rare moment of self-awareness, but also of self-correction. The letter continued with an explanation that would haunt those who read it. The cufflinks, those sacred symbols of duty, were not given as a mark of legacy, but as a quiet form of penance. The king wrote of a line of correction, a lineage that could bypass the emotional coldness he believed he had passed down. In William, still a child unborn at the time, George VI saw hope not of blood, but of character. The cufflinks, he confessed, were meant for the one who could restore what had been broken not by scandal, but by distance. And so, in the final months of his life, he entrusted their future placement to his butler, a man he trusted more than most within the palace walls. That butler, known for his discretion and quiet presence, became the king's secret confidant in his final days. They spoke often at night, away from the grandeur and ceremony, and it was in those hushed conversations that the king confessed fears of a fractured monarchy, one divided not by politics, but by emotion. He foresaw two heirs walking different paths, one burdened by expectation, the other defined by rebellion, and he feared that if a new kind of leadership didn't emerge, the crown would lose not its power, but its purpose. The revelation of this letter hit like a lightning strike across the royal household. It reframed everything. The cufflinks were no longer a gift, they were an indictment, a signal that George VI had chosen to skip over his own son not because he didn't believe in him, but because he believed he had failed him. William's inheritance now carried the added weight of absolution. Charles's reign became not just a continuation, but a haunting reminder of love lost in translation. And for Harry, it cast a new layer of bitterness, because in his eyes even the guilt wasn't shared equally. Even the apology came in the form of exclusion. Publicly, the monarchy remained silent on the letter, but privately damage control spiraled. Could this truth be buried again? Could it be discredited? Or was the genie already out of the crown-shaped bottle? Either way, the story had shifted. No longer was this about an heirloom passed through generations. It was now about a king's last desperate attempt to set right what he could not mend in life. And as the dust of truth settled across royal halls, one final question remained, not about cufflinks, but about control. Now, the cufflinks gleam in the light of a new era, but they carry more than history. For Prince William, they are a symbol of burden, of expectation, of a family torn by favour and fate. Will he rise as the monarch foreseen by his great-grandfather, or crumble beneath the weight of a legacy never asked for? William had never sought this inheritance. He had never even known it existed. Yet now the symbolic weight of King George VI's final gesture rests squarely on his shoulders. The monarchy, which for so long had demanded poise without pause, now demands something far greater from him: redemption. He stands not only as the heir apparent, but as the reluctant fulcrum of a generational divide. And behind the polished smiles and public composure, there are moments quiet, shrouded human, where William feels completely alone. He was born into duty, but now he must carry prophecy, not just a future king, but the emotional correction for a lineage defined by silence, suffering, and selective affection. Privately, those close to him say he's begun to question what the Cufflinks truly represent. Are they a gift from a great-grandfather who saw something extraordinary in him? Or are they the byproduct of guilt, handed down through a chain of broken relationships and royal regrets? The question haunts him. And while he wears the expectations well, he's still a man watching the shadows of his family stretch across the floor of history. Shadows he never invited but now must walk within. The pressure to become not just a modern monarch, but a myth in motion, is heavier than any crown. The media has already seized the moment. Headlines speculate whether this revelation should force the monarchy to rethink its very definition of legacy. Should merit, not blood, become the new metric? Should symbolic items like the cufflinks be passed down with transparency, not secrecy? And if the monarchy claims to evolve with the times, why is its most powerful messaging still buried in hidden drawers and ghost-written diaries? These questions swirl in the background, fueling a storm the palace is desperate to contain. Inside the firm, damage control has turned into delicate orchestration. Advisors are scrambling to reframe the narrative, positioning William not as a chosen one, but as a symbol of unity. Yet even they know that unity is a fragile illusion in a family where silence has long been weaponized. Kate, unwavering in her support, has become Dewey, Liam's anchor. But even she has expressed quiet concerns about the weight now thrust upon their household, not just for their generation, but for their children. What message does this send to George, Charlotte, and Louis? That legacies are crafted behind closed doors and locked drawers? That love can be coded in heirlooms but never spoken aloud? And through it all, one truth lingers like a chill in the corridors of Kensington and Windsor. Perhaps King George VI didn't just predict the divide. Perhaps, in choosing a future he couldn't control, he created it. In trying to repair one fracture, he birthed another. The cufflinks, then, are not merely relics of royalty, they are chains of emotion, binding the present to a past full of ghosts. William may rise, as many believe he will, or he may fall beneath the crushing legacy of being loved too quietly, too symbolically, and far too late. Because in the monarchy, heirlooms don't just pass through hands, they pass through hearts, shattering some while anointing others. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.